Marcina Sherman Riker was born in Castile, New York on July 23, 1852. She began her career as a teacher, but after 3 years decided that serving the impoverished was her duty. In 1880, she then enrolled in the Rochester City Hospital Training School for Nurses, graduating in 1884. After earning her MD at the Homeopathic Hospital in Cleveland, Ohio, and further study in New York City, Marcina returned to Rochester and set up a private practice that focused on women and children. Upon her return to Rochester, she immediately joined the Lake Avenue Baptist Church, where she met her husband, Wentworth Riker, and she took a position at the Rochester Homeopathic Hospital, now known as Genesee Hospital. In 1894, Dr. Riker became a charter member of the Board of Managers at the Door of Hope, where she also served on the medical staff. Immediately, she began to upgrade the medical practices and the environment of the home. At that time, there were no maternity units in the hospitals, and babies were born at home. But the girls who were cared for at the Door of Hope were for the most part thrown out of their homes in disgrace. Although not known as an active suffragist, she was a friend of Susan B. Anthony, as well as serving as her physician. When Susan B. fell ill in 1906, Marcina took charge of the house, frequently spending the night at Susan's bedside, and she was there with Susan B. when she died. In 1900, the annual meeting of the Monroe Baptist Association was held at Bronson Avenue Baptist Church. Following a keynote speaker, Reverend Dr. Walter Rauschenbusch, Dr. Riker rose to her feet and clearly explained the necessity for establishing a home for the needy Baptist members. Although a committee was formed, it took until 1904, when the association met at Clifton Baptist Church, that Dr. Riker was called to the platform to report to the committee again and explain the need, and went on to outline some means by which it could be accomplished. A motion to move forward was passed, and within a month the committee requested a special meeting of the association held at First Baptist, Rochester. In December of 1904, the Monroe County Baptist Home, Fairport Baptist Home, was chartered and opened its doors on July 5, 1905. The first 2 residents of this new home, Mr. and Mrs. Ordway, members of Lake Avenue Baptist Church. It was in 1921 that Dr. Riker was called upon to assist a group of Baptist churches in central New York. They were attempting to establish an orphanage in the Oneonta area. The result was the Upstate Baptist Home for Children, which today is known as Springbrook, and cares for differently abled children and adults. Dr. Riker also had an active role in the Women's Christian Association, which was the forerunner to the YWCA, and the Christian Temperance Union. Marcina died in her home on Lorimer Street, across Jones Park from the church, and is now buried at Mount Hope Cemetery. Next we have Mary Laird, who was born in Bristol, Quebec, and moved to Rochester in 1887, settling in the Lake Ave neighborhood. After graduation from the Rochester General School of Nursing, Mary served on the hospital staff as probation instructor, and then in 1913 went to Columbia University to study public health nursing in the School of Social Work. During World War I, Mary volunteered to serve with a medical team from Rochester in France. She returned to Rochester in 1919 to find the city engulfed by the flu pandemic. Mary determined that caring for people in their homes was a good way to contain the flu, as they would not travel to the hospital where they could get others sick. This theory resulted in the creation of the Visiting Nurse Service in Rochester. Miss Laird served with the Council of Social Agencies as Secretary of the Health Division, and then later served as a visitor for the day nursery of Baden Street Settlement House. During the 1920s, Mary served as the president of the Genesee Valley Nursing Association, president of the Social Workers Club, national chair of the Public Health Nursing Section of the American Public Health Association, and board member for the National Organization for Public Health Nursing. Mary was a self-taught weaver, a skill she continued to apply after she moved to Fairport Baptist Home, and just before she died at the age of 100, she was at the loom weaving. Helen Barrett Montgomery was born in Kingsville, Ohio, July 31, 1863, the eldest of 3 children. After living with her family in Lowville, New York, the Barretts moved to Rochester in 1871, when young Helen was just 9 years old. Her father eventually, after time at Rochester Theological Seminary, graduated in 1876 and accepted the call to pastor Lake Avenue Baptist Church. Helen was baptized at the age of 15 and quickly took on the teaching of the boys' Sunday school class. Her early education was at the Livingston Park Seminary. In 1880, she withdrew from the seminary in order to focus on mathematics in preparation for admission to Wellesley College. In 1884, following her graduation from Wellesley, she returned to Rochester and taught at the Rochester Free Academy, Rochester's first high school. The following year, she became the co-principal at the Wellesley Preparatory School in Philadelphia. After 1 year in Philadelphia, she turned down an offer to take a professorship at Wellesley and withdrew from consideration to become president of 2 colleges. Instead, she returned to Rochester to marry William A. Montgomery, who was much older than Helen and was a well-known Sunday school teacher at Lake Avenue Baptist Church. After their marriage, they took up residence in Rochester, and Helen immediately formed a women's Bible class named after her father. Helen was encouraged by Susan B. Anthony and Mary Gannett to become involved in a great deal of civic work in Rochester. While Helen was involved in a great deal of civic work, perhaps most significantly was the fact that in 1899 she was elected to serve as the first woman on the school board. Shortly thereafter, she assumed the position of president, and during her tenure, significant reforms took place in the Rochester public schools. In 1997, at a rededication ceremony, the Rochester school system rededicated school number 50 as the Helen Barrett Montgomery School. In 1898, in response to the push to allow women to be admitted to the University of Rochester, a fundraising campaign was started, and Helen was the campaign chair. In the end, it raised $50,000, and for the first time, women were then admitted to the University of Rochester as full-time students. All the while, growing up in the church, Helen had many opportunities to preach, and when Dr. Barrett died on his way to services, Helen stepped in. During her 2 years that the church searched for the new minister, Helen frequently took the pulpit, and in 1892, the church licensed her to preach. In addition to teaching her Sunday school class, Helen engaged in several church programs that ministered to youth. In 1931, Helen gave $25,000 to build the President's House on the campus of Colgate Rochester Divinity School. The house was named Montgomery House.